Upasama Prakarana, Chapter 9, The Story of Vitahavya. As the twilight fades, one can barely make out the surrounding stark volcanic landscape. The crescent moon hangs over the distant horizon, while the silhouettes of half a dozen telescopes rise from the mountain like temples dedicated to the night sky. Nearly 14,000 feet below, the waves lash at the warm beaches of Hawaii's Big Island. It is the summit of Mauna Kea, where the temperature is near freezing. It holds Keck telescope, collecting and focusing starlight from throughout the universe with a primary mirror of glass that measures 10 meters across. Telescopes like these have become the eyes of the astronomers who peep into space and time. An astronomer strains his eyes to look into the past as the light from the stars and the star systems that he beholds presently had left its sources years back, some of them even millions of years. It is like having a review of the events that took place long back. As his eyes seek the celestial object, a distant galaxy in some constellation, he becomes totally oblivious to his surrounding. The freezing cold has hardly any effect over his body. The sandwich kept in a paper plate goes stale and coffee cold. The disturbance caused by a letter from home, the problem of a slight misunderstanding with a friend, just vanish from his consciousness. For him, the telescope is not just an instrument, but his own extended eyes. The computer, decoding thousands of signals and directing the mirrors, is no more an electronic device, but his own brain. He has totally identified with his instruments, telescope, computer, etc. The only thing principal in his attention is the object of his search and a thirst to absorb as much information as possible. Man's condition is almost similar to that of the astronomer. He too is lost in his ruminations on the past or projections into future. His instruments are the senses and the mind. At the same time, there are some vital differences. Though the astronomer is lost while at work, he does return to the present, maybe after a few hours, when the eastern horizon again starts blushing. Man is not only seeped in the mire of sense indulgence to become a slave to his senses, but has also become a helpless victim of his antakarana, the inner instrument. So, his sleep of self-forgetfulness is much deeper and chronic. Most of us are so because of the fact that we consider ourselves to be only body, senses, or at the most mind. Such indulgence and involvement is only natural because millions of years of evolution and the struggle for survival demanded it. The bank of knowledge, preserved as it is in the brain, helps us to survive while facing day-to-day problems. This self-preservative instinct has been named by Sigmund Freud as eros. All activity of all the creatures, whether it is fear, hunger, sleep or procreation, comes under eros. It would have been of little consequence if man too remained stuck to only survival. But man, as we know, is a rational and thinking creature, and this fact creates complications. By his very nature, man cannot be satisfied with mere survival. But since he is endowed with wonderful body, senses, and an equally wonderful mind, which by nature are turned outwards, all he can think and dream of is bettering his external life by improving and increasing the sense objects that give him pleasures, although they are momentary. The other plane he involves himself in is the mental plane. He wants to explain his surroundings as well as his own behavior, and his search has brought him a revolution through the information he has gathered and is continuing to gather. He is moved by certain events and conditions to the familiar emotions of fear, anger, disgust, wonder, and love. Thus, the mind and the intellect react to the external situation. Consequently, he is obsessed only by the outside at the cost of the inside, which is infinitely larger. The science, which is his own brainchild, too recognizes and pursues only the external objects that can be perceived only by the senses, including those extensions like the telescope, microscope, etc. So, science and her all-powerful daughter technology aim to make life more and more comfortable. Even man's attempt to explain his own behavior is directed outside because he tries to understand himself by looking at others who are outside. That is how all his efforts tend to leave most of himself from observation. Scientists around the world are slowly realizing that in their method they are considering only the tip of the iceberg, leaving most of it as only the tip is perceivable to the senses, or the sensitive instruments which are only their extensions. However, all actions performed are in some way or the other have satisfaction and happiness as their aim, which are the inner phenomena. But the search for them is unfortunately directed outside. Because of this, instead of being comfortable and leisurely, man is becoming more and more greedy, anxious, tense, and miserable. As the sense gratification is only temporary, he remains dissatisfied. His aspiration to better himself and his perpetual state of discontent definitely help him to progress technologically, but they also generate frustrations. Because by very nature, senses and the mind are limited in their capacity to enjoy. Moreover, the repeated sense indulgence further reduces their capacity. There is an episode in Kathopanishad. Nachiketa approaches Yama, the lord of death, for knowing the Brahman. Just to test the sincerity of the aspirant, Yama offers him celestial enjoyments in lieu of the sacred knowledge. Alert Nachiketa observes, Shvobhava martasya yadantaka sarvendriyanam jarayanti tejaha api sarvam jivitamalpameva tavaiva vahas tava nritya gite. O destroyer, death, the enjoyments you have offered me are not permanent and keep reducing the capacity of the senses. And this life itself is very short. So let the vehicles, dances and songs remain with you. Sigmund Freud discovered that there is another complementary instinct to eros, that is thanatos, the instinct for self-destruction or the death wish, leading man towards his death. Because of his extreme attachment to life, man gets more frustrated. Animals, on the other hand, take death as naturally as life because they do not suffer from attachment to life. Since man is extremely attached to life, through his desires and dreams, he does get frustrated and can and does entertain a wish to end it all when the desires and dreams do not get fulfilled. In this sense, eros and thanatos together cover all desires necessary for survival and form something like a bridge. Without them, survival itself is not possible. They both are complementary in the sense that they are just obverse and reverse of desire in general. However, life is not just survival, it is infinitely more. Our so called ordinary life is governed by laughter, tears, feelings, compassion, love, and much more, and transcends the limitations of desires for the objects of senses. We observe that the hunger for the sense objects is only short lived, but then subtler desires like acquisition of power, knowledge, and in short, those which are connected with I and mine are also external. One should, however, guard against making a very grave and yet avoidable blunder. One should never negate or look down upon or even punish the body and senses by either starving them or by other cruel methods as glorified by asceticism in some of the religions. It is said that in some monastic denomination of a religion, the monks cut off their genitals to combat lust. In most of the religions, fasting, vigil, and negating other senses is recommended. These, no doubt, are not so dangerous, but they may not have the expected effect. There are some inherent dangers in such kind of attitude and practice. First danger is that the desires, instead of getting eliminated, only get suppressed, further complicating the mind. When we starve a sense or suppress a desire, it comes out in some other form. A person practicing celibacy may lean on gluttony to overcome suppression or may become extremely short tempered. Moreover, he or she may be under constant threat of the attack from those very things which are being avoided in unguarded moments. Consequently, there is a negative attachment as the person goes out of the way to avoid situations. He may belittle or talk against senses and their objects. In this sense, such persons tend to spend more time in thinking, even if it's against, about those very objects. There is a story to illustrate this. Two monks, a youth and an old man, were traveling. They were on their way to their master's hermitage. On way, they had to cross a small river. When they came near its bank, they saw a young woman lying unconscious. The youth approached in spite of the protests from the old colleague and found that she was too weak to cross the river on her own and sought help. The youth spontaneously lifted her on his shoulder and took her across and left her near her house on the opposite bank. The old man started scolding the youth for breaking the vow of monastic life and for defiling himself by touching a woman. It continued till they finally reached their master's hermitage. All along, the youth remained calm and refused to react in any other way. When the old disciple complained to the master about the objectionable behavior, the master smilingly asked the old man about the distance the youth had carried the woman. Innocently, the old man replied that it was while crossing the breadth of a shallow river which was about 200 feet. The master admonished the older monk that while the youth had carried her only that distance, and that too only physically, the old monk was still carrying her in his mind, which is a greater offense for a monk. Second, and perhaps more fundamental problem with such an attitude is that we tend to go on dividing existence into material and spiritual, body, senses and mind, profane and sacred, and so on. This division, by its very nature, cannot take one towards the ultimate reality, which is one and non-divisible. The so-called gross, like the body senses, are nothing but its gross manifestation, while the mind, intellect and ego are the subtler ones. Moreover, these divisions are effected by the ego, which is nothing but the inconsequential shadow of the reality for its own survival. It is like a political leader who survives only by dividing the society. But a question may arise in our mind that almost all the spiritual traditions do recommend the negation of body senses and prove beyond doubt that they cannot possibly experience the reality because experience as such comes under activity, physical or psychological, as the reality is the subtlest, transcending all its manifestations. To make us aware of these problems, we find all the scriptures suggesting the seeker to give up the gross and to choose the subtle. By its very nature, the subtle cannot be perceived by the gross. To perceive it, one has to go to subtler level, which requires that we have to shift our attention from the gross to the subtle. Sri Ramakrishna used to give an example to explain this. A person interested in going on top of a terrace uses the stairs. Each time he climbs a stair, he has to leave the lower step to come to a higher stair. But once he is on top of the terrace, he realizes that the terrace, the stairs, and even the building itself is made out of the same bricks, mortar, and lime. Sri Ramakrishna was so clear in his thinking and advice that there is no room for any conflict or confusion. This may have been due to the fact that he was not corrupted by the so-called education. It is of primary importance for a seeker never to have any antagonistic view towards body senses, desires, and material world in general. Virakti, or the disinterest, should be positive in the sense that the gross has a distracting effect, making it very difficult, if not impossible, to perceive the subtle. If one always keeps this in mind and studies the scriptures, there is no danger of any negativity or division. Sage Vasishta said that the best method of destroying the pain-giving mind that is bound by the cord of desire is jnana. A stainless mind, which is freed from all desire, even if engaged in worldly activity, is never bound. And the mind with raga or attraction and dvesha or aversions, though engaged in severe tapas, will always be in bondage. A person without any internal craving, capable of performing action without any attachment, that is, attraction and aversion, will alone not have the characteristics of actor and enjoyer, whether he performs external actions or not. At this statement, Rama asked as to what is meant by sangha or association, and what is it which leads to liberation. What is bondage, and how this bondage can be ended? Vasishta replied that by giving up the division between body and its occupant, from the mind one can become free. The conviction that one is only body senses mind is sangha or association and is the cause of bondage. The conviction that the ultimate reality is beyond the purview of space and time, which leads towards equipoise, is asanga or non-association. Instead, the longing for the sense pleasures alone causes bondage. Everything, seen and the unseen, is one and only reality. What can one possess or renounce if one is of this conviction that she or he arises towards Jivan Mukti, the state of non-association of mind, when neither I nor any other self exist during the experience of pleasure or pain, is to be taken as a path leading towards moksha. Such persons neither count action nor inaction, as they are free from any desire for the fruits of action. They are not choosy of either action or non-action. The wise say that such persons are called asamsaktas. Even the persons who have renounced the fruits of action but not the action itself are called as asamsaktas. By such an attitude, the stains of never-ending actions is effaced. It is through Sangha alone that the long chain of births is undergone, which disappears at every stage like the bubbles on the surface of the ocean. It will be appropriate to recollect the first verse of the scripture, which gives a few hints on the ultimate principle. Divi bhumo tatha kashe bahirantascha me vibhuhu yo vibhati avabhasatma tasmai sarvatmane namaha. Salutations to that supreme principle inherent in air, earth and sky, inside and outside, in whose luminance the Atman shines. From this lofty shloka, we can safely infer that division of any kind is not advisable, and that if one does entertain for pragmatic reasons like developing disinterest in the body, senses, mind, reason and ego, it should be only for eliminating the gross distractions and for paying attention to the subtle. It has been observed that almost all the astronauts, when they behold the earth from space, forget every man-made divisions like boundaries, race, religion, country and continent. But then, to do so, they have to be in space, far away from earth. The state of asanga, or the non-association, refers to the act of distancing oneself from the gross and to be the oneness of existence. Continuing, the respected sage said that the attraction is of two types, Vandhya or fruitless and Vandhya or respected. Vandhya is found in the ignorant and Vandhya is the ornament of all self-realized persons. While Vandhya leads one towards Atmajnana and Viveka, arresting the rebirths taking place in eons of time, Vandhya traps one into the mire of attachment and continual rebirths. One should know the difference between the two types of attractions. Vishnu, the sustaining power of this universe, acts without in the least attachment to the manifold action with Vandhya type of attraction. Similarly, Siddhas, or those who have achieved, and the Jnanins, or those who have become wise, become the true protectors of this earth through their attractions. But mind as such mistakes the bad things for good and gets more and more involved in them, inviting evil and creating hell through the Vandhya attraction. Taking the help of Vidya to remove avidya that goads the mind towards attractions, one who remains alert and awake all the while is a mukta. Upanishadic tradition has always insisted on gradual and, if one may say so, non-violent method of quietening the mind. Total abstinence or starving the senses from their objects is always to be avoided. That is why it is indirectly suggested here to adopt a higher attraction, Vandhya, so that the lower attractions, Vandhya, drop on their own. What is this Vandhya attraction? It becomes very clear through the example of Vishnu, the sustaining power of the universe. Without this power, there can be no universe, and yet this power is totally hidden behind the myriad of activity that goes on in the universe. For example, the presence of electricity can be inferred only through its effects, as it as it always remains hidden to our eyes. In the earlier shlokas, the sage suggested that one be detached from the fruits of action and to eliminate the doership. In this sense, one uses the attraction for freedom to overcome the attraction for objects having a binding effect. Sage Vasishta then proceeded to describe the state of Jivan Muktas who, in different avasthas and or states, being in the minds of all creatures, he performs actions without any attachment to the actions, thoughts, objects, akasha, space, ups and downs, quarters, enjoyments, five senses, internal pranas or vital forces, head, face, five organs of action, body, the three states of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, colors or gunas, three conditions, beginning, middle, and end, five tanmatras, sensations, or the five bhutas or elements. Because of such non-involvement, such persons never associate themselves with lower attractions. Consequently, when such a person acts, the action never binds her or him to either the world or the action. By transcending indulgence and involvement, the mental activity becomes quiet. With such quietude of mind, one gets established in Turiya, the fourth state, then transcends the realm of experience to be Anandatita, Jnanatita, or transcending even bliss and wisdom. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad or Shrutis dealing with the true path suggest that the principle inherent in the gross and the subtle is the supreme principle. The author then gives three gems in the form of verses condensing the positive attitude of the Upanishads. Drishya darshana sambandhe yat sukham paramarthikam anubhuti mayam tasmat saram brahmeti katyate. Drishya darshana sambandhe sukha samvitanuttama drishya samvalita bandha tanmukta muktiruchyate. Drishya darshana sambandhe yanubhuti ranamaya tamavashtabhyatishtabtvam saushuptim bhajate sthitim. During the contact of the senses with their objects, the essence of happiness experienced without even a trace of separateness of the object and the experiencer is said to be supreme. When the seen and the sight merge into one another in the seer, the experience of happiness is unparalleled. Hankering for the objects is bondage. Freedom from this attraction is mukti. That state of direct experience in which the seen and the sight merge into one another is unattended by pain. Therefore, let the mind always have this state called as Saushupti, which serves as a beacon light. Upanishads, on which our whole culture is founded, have always been life-affirming. Life in all its shades was accepted. The normal lifespan was divided into four portions: Brahmacharya, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, and Sannyasa, which were to be lived totally. The first phase was devoted for learning, in which one had to spend the 1/4 portion of one's life in hermitages to taste non-involvement, meditation, etc. at the feet of realized sages. On return, one had to enter the second phase of material life. In spite of activity involving the married life, the training of meditation was helpful in non-involved action. The third phase of life consisted of gradual withdrawal from active life and moving towards retirement. Finally, there would be the total effort for spiritual practice. Naturally, there was room for any negativity. The practice of initiation into sannyasa without the intermediate stages came much later after Mahavir Jain and the Buddha, to be followed by Adi Shankaracharya. Moreover, the Upanishadic sages were very much aware that negativity of any kind only increases the activity of the mind, leading a seeker towards suppression or even perversion. The tendency of the mind and senses is to flow towards their objects, which is only natural and healthy. If one starts, for whatever reason, to starve the senses with an attitude that sense indulgence is bad, then one can be certain that the mind would go more towards it. For instance, if one decides to go on a fast, there is every likelihood of one seeing and imagining the food in every situation, and perhaps that particular day one may speak more about food than on normal days. But if one accepts everything as part of the divine existence and chooses a particular way of life rather than rejecting the other things as bad, she or he will have a better possibility of completing the journey. Vasishta continued that the reality is also Turiya state. The Atman is neither gross nor subtle, neither perceptive nor non-perceptive, neither intelligent nor inert, as it transcends all states and is beyond all conditioning. The state called moksha is neither Devaloka or the heaven, nor Patala or the nether world, nor earth. When all desires are destroyed, what remains is moksha. Even longing for moksha can revive the desires in the mind, as it increases the manana or the meditations to only increase the births and deaths. Therefore, the sage urged that one must destroy the mind and its thoughts to root out all problems. Those who have worshipped the Atmic reality, which transcends body-mind, lose its consciousness though acting through it. Like a woman who performs her household duties while her mind is engrossed in the destined paramour, a jnani always centers himself on the Brahmic bliss. They neither long for things in future, nor ruminate upon things of the past, nor do they stagnate in the present. They appear as devotees among devotees, conduct themselves tactfully among men of the world, as children amongst children, as old men amongst the old, as youths among the young. Knowing all things as they are never attached. The world appears diversified only because of the fluctuations of the mind. Sri Ramakrishna gives a few wonderful hints to the householders through some day-to-day examples. Do all your duties, but keep your mind on God. Live with all, with wife and children, father and mother, and serve them. Treat them as if they are very dear to you, but know in your heart of hearts that they do not belong to you. A maidservant in the house of a rich man performs all her household duties, but her thoughts are fixed on her own home in her native village. She brings up her master's children as my Hari or my Rama, but in her own mind she knows very well that they do not belong to her at all. The tortoise moves about in the water, but can you guess where her thoughts are? There on the bank, where her eggs are lying. Do all your duties in the world, but keep your mind on God. One of the greatest hurdles for quietening the mental activity is the incompleteness of our transactions. Whenever there is an experience, the mind is absent to the experience as such. For example, there is a desire for eating something. When the eatable is brought in front, the mind remains on the object it craved only for a moment and then passes on to either past or the present. Consequently, the same mind tries to complete this transaction mentally when the object is not available. This habit only increases its fluctuations, whereas if one totally lives the moment, when the sense comes in touch with its object, the transaction gets completed and there is no need for the mind to recapitulate the experience. Consequently, the mind is ever fresh and free from fluctuations. Rama, a prince among the seekers, sought a clarification. What cause the fluctuations of the mind? How can one eliminate these fluctuations? The great sage replied that the fluctuations are not different from the mind. They both are as inseparable as the sesame seed and oil, or the snow and its whiteness. Mind exists because of the fluctuations. Yoga and jnana are the two methods of eliminating the mind. Stopping the modifications is yoga, while jnana is samyagavekshanam, or non-involved witnessing from within. Persons well versed in the Vedic lore claim that the mind is nothing but the fluctuations of prana. With the control of prana, the mind is also controlled. With the control of mind and its fluctuations, rebirth ceases like the daily actions ceasing at sunset. Again Rama interposed to inquire about the means of arresting the motion of prana that vibrates ceaselessly. The sage replied with infinite patience, having lived the life of Vairagya and practiced yoga, one must come out of the binding tendencies. By the single pointedness of a man intensely desirous of achieving something, one can control the prana. Through practice of Puraka Kumbhaka, Rechaka Kumbhaka, that is pranayama, in a solitary place with a cheerful mind, one can bring the prana under control. The prana can be subjugated through the chanting of pranava or omkara in the stipulated manner. The vibrations of prana can be quelled through the practice of khechari mudra. One can gain control over prana by directing from throat to the space between the eyebrows. The prana comes under control of a person staying alone and practicing mauna or silence. Such hints and many more, as transferred by various experienced wise through the traditions in different places and times, are the ways in which the fluctuations of prana are brought under control. Through constant and unbroken practice of any of these methods, the mind becomes quiescent and ready for nirvana or transcendence. In the above statement, the author tries to give some of the methods controlling prana and hence the mind. Most, if not all, the practices are never to be practiced without the guidance of an experienced teacher, because the practical aspects are seldom given in the books, and if they do, they'll be in symbolic language. This is so as the most important hints are given only after the initiation in the secret schools. A novice should never do these practices by taking the help of books, as it can result in insanity or even death. However, it is quite interesting to note that most of these methods try to gain control over the gross manifestations like body posture or gesture, breath, sound, etc., to achieve the quiescence indirectly. The author continues to give the methods of jnana, which, though taking longer, are quite safe. After listening carefully about the methods of controlling prana, which help the mind to reach a state of equilibrium that help the mind from involving with the senses, Rama appealed to the sage to narrate the methods of jnana. The Muni replied that one should develop the conviction that it is Brahman alone which shines everywhere, which has no beginning, middle, or end, that all Shaktis or powers are nothing but the manifestations of the Atman, which are used in the worship of itself. Such conviction eliminates all the problems created by duality. Turning towards the non dual principle helps in eradicating the restless generated by the mind. When one enters into non dual, there is nothing to create the fluctuations of mind. Such conviction makes one ready for turning inwards. Gradually, one starts seeing the reality in all its manifestations, like one who is able to see water in waves, foam, bubbles, etc. At such state, one cannot get agitated by the indulgences or involvements. To illustrate this, sage Vasishta narrated the story of Vitahavya. A recluse named Vitahavya lived on the slopes of Vindhya mountains. He had performed actions goaded by desires and was afflicted with mental and physical maladies and was unable to get out of samsara. Wanting to escape from pain, he gave up the action and retreated to the forest. Erecting a hut of leaves, he seated himself in the lotus posture on a deer skin. Slowly, he succeeded in bringing back the mind from the objects and fixed it on the heart space. He noticed that though the mind was devoid of thoughts, there were pranic fluctuations which tended to reactivate the mind. With this observation, Vitahavya began his vichara, wherein he started separating himself from the body, instruments of actions, senses, mind, reason, and finally ahankara. With this vichara, everything was brought under control. Like the flames get absorbed in themselves after having consumed the fuel, prana gradually merged into itself and there was quiescence. After a long time, Vitahavya emerged to the wakeful state and found his body buried in a hillock of sand formed by floods of water. The pranas were unable to circulate freely. When he began to give attention to his mind, he began to perceive, as if in a dream, that he had spent 100 years as a tapaswin on the slopes of Mount Kailasa, as a Vidyadhara for another 100 years, as Devendra for 500 yugas, then as Ganesha. Thus, Vitahavya saw his former lives pass through his divine vision. With the destruction of these bodies, he saw his present body, which was buried deeply in sand. In order to lift the body out of sand, he approached the sun to seek the help of Pingala. With its help, Muni recovered his gross body. Having spent a few days on the banks of the Narmada, the river flowing on the rocks of the Vindhyas, he realized that till then he had been having conscious control over the organs and mind. He decided to merge into Chinmatra, or the absolute consciousness alone, which remains after everything merges into reality. He felt convinced that with such awareness, he can remain unmoved and quiescent in spite of the continued lower activity. With practiced ease, he merged himself in Chinmatra and began to live as a Jivanamukta. All pleasure and pain, attachment and disgust was eliminated, and the Muni freed himself from rebirth and action. An innocent thought of reaching Kaivalya crossed his mind. For this purpose, Vitahavya the Siddha entered a cave one day. After adopting the lotus posture again, he reflected, "O soft desire, please merge into non-desire. O anger, be pleased to embrace the quiescence. I have enjoyed your company for a very long time, having amused myself with various tricks. O enjoyments, my salutations to you. O material joy, you have nurtured me like a mother as to her own son. Under your care, I became oblivious to the pain-free moksha. I offer you my parting farewell. O pain, is it not due to you that I have been able to recognize the path towards Atma Tattva, the Supreme Principle? You have been the cause of my merging into the state of moksha. Can I ever be ungrateful to you? Gratitude to you, my Savior. O body, my long-standing friend, I take leave of you, for you have fulfilled the purpose of attaining jnana. My respectful greetings to you, O lust, your insatiable hunger helped me to have a glimpse into your fault and the auspiciousness of the quietude of senses. O good deeds, you lured me towards you with the temptation of heaven. Please accept my parting salutations. All of you, my respected friends, you have helped me in achieving quiescence. I am ever grateful to you. Taking leave of them all, he dropped the activity called mind. Reaching the jnana state, he softly uttered pranava and gave up the sankalpa completely. The Muni became that, the final aim of all Shastras. Having dropped the fetters which are responsible for binding one to the sansara, Vitahavya was soon absorbed in the non-dual state. Vitahavya's journey into himself is illustrative of problems of a seeker. His involvement with actions to fulfill his never-ending desires represents our own life. The feeling of frustration when our desires remain unfulfilled, or empty-handedness each time we apparently succeed, do make us realize the pointlessness of desire. It also leaves us drained of vital energy. This is when we start looking for other possibilities. The mind has to be brought under some control before one embarks on the path of vichara. The separateness of I from all the manifestations is always deep, as is evident in the case of Vitahavya. He transcended time and space to experience the cosmic oneness that made him identify with the Tapaswin, Vidyadhara, Indra, and for that matter Ganesha. It is like a wave suddenly realizing its identity with infinite ocean. This story ends on an extremely positive note with Vitahavya's poetic leaves-taking with the manifestations. This emphasizes that everything in the universe, including the so-called negative, has a role to play on the journey. Katyayani, the wife of sage Yajnavalkya, is extremely happy looking at the 1,000 milch cows grazing on the mountain slope. She also has pride in dancing in her bosom, as they have been won by her husband as a token of respect and appreciation for his wisdom in the assembly of King Janaka. Looking at her, the sage smilingly asks her the reason for her happiness. She innocently replies that the sight of the cattle is very fulfilling. The sage points out that although she had seen such scenes earlier in her life, she had never been so happy. Then, can she tell him why she is presently in such happy state? Again, Katyayani replies innocently that the cows she had been seen earlier did not belong to her, while these cows belong to her. Yajnavalkya asks his dear wife to imagine the bliss of the person to whom this whole universe belongs. When he finds her quiet, awestruck by the possibility, he asks her to further imagine the bliss of the person who is this whole universe. Man finds the night sky tempting as it evokes a sense of awe and wonder in him. While gazing, he finds all his worries and problems petty and insignificant. Compared to the vastness of space, he, nay the earth, nay even the solar system, dwindles into insignificance. Perhaps this feeling of smallness compels him to melt into insignificance, or in other words, identify himself with the vastness of space like a wave dissolving in the ocean. While astronomy initiates him in a spirit of inquiry and a voyage to understand his place in the universe, spirituality is a cordial invitation for him to become the universe and more, and both are reliable ways to understanding himself.